Welcome, friends. It is week 2 already. Can you believe it? We've already done an entire week of React in JavaScript. So really excited. We get to start in week 2. Now we're starting to ramp up just a little bit. Today this week shouldn't be super duper difficult. The way I sort of try to teach it is we're going to talk about one topic today and that's it. We're going to recap about React and we're talking about one topic. And then after that, we will start doing some forms. I guess I can show you right here. We're going to talk today about state. And so what is state? We're going to talk about hooks, maybe a little bit about events, but maybe tomorrow when I'll probably bring in events tomorrow when we're dealing with our form, because we're going to have to submit that form and create an event. And then, so we're going to really talk about forms and events tomorrow. And the last one's just going to be map and filter. What's the difference? What's a higher order function? What's a callback function? How we're going to handle that, and then why we're going to use map versus like just a for loop, which is a great question. So while we'll do that, then next week, what we're going to do is we're going to kind of keep going through that. We're going to talk about lifting state, map, and filter, just making sure everybody knows that. And then the fun stuff is we actually start with APIs. So we're going to start jumping into APIs, calling in APIs. We'll talk about what is an API. If you have no idea, we're going to do that, talk about that. And that's basically what we're creating at the end of the day. So we'll be able to have access to all of that. And then we're into week 4, which this is where really the fun stuff begins. We do our back end. We start on our back end, we start with our database, and we're just almost there, guys. So I know that it's in 2 weeks, but we are going to be cruising. Just so you guys know, I will be doing an office hour on Bootstrap tomorrow. So in the office hour, usually I need like 30 minutes. So the first 30 minutes can be questions or vice versa. And so that'll be recorded. If you can't make office hour, as always, it'll be recorded. It'll be right here if we need, or if you want to watch it, it'll be right there. The reason I do it before forms is because I will use Bootstrap in my forms. I'll also, reiterate like, hey, if you don't know what this means, that's very okay. I'm just using Bootstrap. Go watch the office hour. You can do it without Bootstrap and it'll work the exact same way. It just is easier for making it look nice. So that's what we'll do. Mañana. That's what we'll do tomorrow. Just as a reminder, we've got 2 discussion questions due Sunday, 11:59 p.m. A lot of you guys did really great. Some of you guys did forget to do them. So please make sure they're due like for the rest of the week. I saw a ton of like 400%, which is dope. Like, yes, do that. Go do them all through week 4. Get it out of the way. Don't let this be a thing that holds you back. So please make sure you do at least your 2 discussion questions this week for week 2. Just as a reminder, you cannot make these up. So unless something super duper duper weird happens or you have some sort of emergency, if that's the case, come talk to me. But if you just forget, there's nothing we can do to make those up. So if I get like an email of like, hey, can I make these up? Can I just send them to you? I can't do anything with that. I just literally my hands are tied. So please make sure you do those. You've got 3 core assignments. They're kind of building on each other in a way. So we have putting it together. We've got hook forms and more forms. And so again, today we'll kind of hit some of the stuff here. Hook forms will be tomorrow, and then more forms we'll keep building on that. I've had a couple of questions about grading assignments. And just so you guys know, I actually don't grade assignments. I know that sometimes, you guys might have had instructors that do grade assignments. It's not inherently kind of what Coding Dojo, it's kind of a instructor's preference or an instructor's kind of thought. The way I see it is assignments are great, and you obviously, I think I spelled that wrong. Yeah, they're good and you need to do them. But there's 65 students, and the way that a MERN project works compared to like a Python or a Java, it's actually a lot more work on our end to download stuff, and especially when we get into full stack. So I don't grade assignments. My thought on that is, if you would like an assignment graded, if you feel free to reach out to me and say, hey, I'm really wanting to see how this is done. We can either do an office hour and walk through that, or you can do an office hour with any instructor, here. So again, if my schedule is off, you can do any instructor, or here's my specific schedule, or you can make some time with Gray and just say, hey, I just want to go over this assignment. Like I did this with a student last week. Or maybe it was yesterday, and we just went over like, hey, yep, nope, you're crushing it. This is exactly what you need to do. That's the way I approach grading assignments. So if you're kind of sitting and wondering, why am I not getting feedback? That's why. Judge Hall is a great place to just say, hey, I want to get some feedback from this assignment. Want to make sure I'm doing things well. If you schedule a one-on-one with me or an instructor, if there's really an assignment that you're kind of stressed about, then we can make sure that happens, or a one-on-one with Gray when they get back, or Paul's in here too. So Paul, I'm just going to throw you out there. If you want to get a one-on-one with Paul, go over assignments, then you can do that. Let me spell this correctly. Whoa. Oops, you guys all went away. Yep. There we go. Okay. Cool. So yeah, any questions on that? Any thoughts? Anything with assignments? Great. If you guys have anything, as always, put it in the chat and then I can read it as well. You guys aren't seeing my screen, are you? Oh my gosh. I'm literally not even sharing my screen. Total fail. Sorry about that, friends. Feel free next time, if I just start speaking, then let me know that you can't see my screen or
I think we've seen everything on your screen since you started. So you are sharing.
Thanks, Tabitha. I got stressed because on the side I had the grid, which is all of your faces, which, sorry, at the beginning of this recording. Now I'm sweating because I got nervous. So, okay, we're good to go. Great. Putting it together. These are your 3 assignments for this week. Again, due by Sunday as well. So please do that. Cool. Yeah. And Paul is here to help if you need anything as well. Whether it's through grading assignments or just have a question right now, Paul's going to be here for the next couple classes. So please make sure to ask some questions if you need. Cool. Just wanted to do a recap. Also, just a quick walkthrough of, because all we're really talking about today is event or hooks and use state. So wanted to do a quick recap again of React, what we talked about, and then walking through file structure again. And I know that I've had quite a few comments on how do I deal with Git and manage that. So I thought we could just do that today as a class, and then we'll go through use state and handling, kind of getting that information, having that information, and dealing with our components and actually doing something with it. So great. Just as a recap, when we are dealing with React, we've talked about how React is a single page application, right? And we've talked about how the power is we have one HTML, and then we can take pieces, kind of like a Lego man or a character of a video game, right? Where there's kind of this base character, and then you just kind of change out the style and what they look like, the color, the whatever. Same sort of thing with React. We have one HTML, it's a single page application, and we can make sure that we only have what we need when we need it, and we can reuse components. So the reusability is really, really high, which gives us this thing called dry code, which is do not repeat yourself, right? So we want to make sure that we're not continuously writing the same code over and over and over and having the, many, many, many HTML files. We just need one, and we can do those pieces here. So can anybody remember, I'm in my class. Let me make this a little bit bigger. I'm in my terminal here. I've just got this class overview. What do I need to do if I want a React file, or if I want to create a React project? What do I need to do here? You guys feel free to come off mute.
Start by going into your original files where your React folder is.
Yeah, absolutely. So I don't have a React folder here, but I see it in Nandor has npx create React app. Now, what is the one thing I have to do if we're dealing with Git, right? What is the one thing I have to do before I even do npx create React app? Yep, I'm seeing it in chat. I need to initialize, right? I need to initialize my repository. Now, I am currently, I don't see anything, but I am currently in April MERN, right? So this has my week 1, week 2, week 3. I don't know why I did week 3. This is literally week 2. Sorry about that. So I already have that, right? So if I initialize, and this is sort of the error here, is if we were to first run npx create React app, what it does is it creates that hidden file. So if I were to say ls space -a, This gives me my hidden files. This is everything plus my hidden files. So this folder right here, this is my initialized repository within this folder or within this project, right? This is because I am personally putting everything in one folder, this April MERN. Now, if you wanted to do it to where everything is separate, yes, you want to run get init before you do anything, right? You'd create your folder, you'd run get init. And then when you run get init, it's going to create this folder right here. Now, when we run, so let me go to CD week. I called it week 3. This is my fault. So when I run npx create react app client, when I run this, what it's doing is it's going to get me a whole bunch of stuff, right? It's going to get me my node modules. It's going to create my package JSON, my package lock. It's going to create my source and my public. It's going to create everything. What it will also do is npx create react app will go and look up the chain, right? Up the tree, the folder structure, and say, is there already an initialized repository or do I need to create a new one? Right? So if I say here, I just have my class overview and my client. If I say ls-a, there's nothing. If I cd into my client and I say ls, we have all of our node modules or package JSON. If I say ls-a, you see that there is a get ignore, which we already saw, right? That's my get ignore, but there is no get file. There is no .get file. And that's because it recognizes npx create react app will recognize that, hey, there is already an initialized repository. Therefore, I don't need to make a new one. Therefore, it won't. Just as a reminder, if you don't do that, if I were to run npx create react app and then after I just wanted lecture 1 to be its own project and I go and I try to init, it's going to give me an error, right? It's going to say, hey, you've got a nested repository. That's not cool. What I can do to kind of cancel that is, let's say that there was in this, we did have a .get folder. All I have to do is navigate to my client or whatever you called your app. And then I just have to say rm rf.get. And that is going to delete this folder, this repository. And then I would navigate. Once I do that, I would navigate back to whatever folder I wanted. Oops. I would navigate back to whatever folder I wanted, and then I would run get init. Makes sense? So if you do get a nested, it's not that big of a deal. You just have to go remove the get file first, or the get folder first, and then you go and nest, and then you should be fine. But if you guys are doing this as your own individual assignments, which is fine, you can do however you choose. If you choose to do it on GitHub, make sure that you initialize your folder first. In the case of if you're doing them all in one folder, the minute you do it for one, like this April MERN, once this is initialized, now any project I do for the next 8 weeks, I don't have to do anything with it, right? I can run npx create react app. It'll go up the file tree to this, and then it won't create my .get. So you only have to do it once if you do one folder, or if you want to do each individual assignment as their own thing, you have to do it every single time. Is there a benefit to doing one or the other? Not necessarily. On GitHub, it's going to track just how many push request, like how many pushes you do. So it doesn't matter if it's an individual repo or if it's its own repo. If you have like 5,000 repos compared to 50, I don't know if a recruiter will care because you can see how many repositories each person has. But yeah, it doesn't matter. I think it's easier to do it all as one folder, just because again, you only have to do it once. You just initialize this repository, and then moving forward, npx create react app will handle it itself. As a reminder, if you are using something like Vite, it doesn't do this .get, so you should be fine if you wanted to handle that way. But cool. Any questions on that? Just really wanted to, I had a couple questions this past week about it.
I did have a question, Will. So because I asked you earlier about this, and I looked into my files, I don't have that .get. Will it only do the .get if you already have Git downloaded? Like I didn't have it downloaded before I did my create React app. So will it do the .git? Because I don't see it in that folder that I, downloaded the Create React app.
Yeah, no, it shouldn't. If you didn't have
Okay.
Git in there, then it shouldn't initialize a repository because you don't even have that set up.
Okay, so I can just now choose my folder and then go from there. where I
Yeah, so
wanna-
you should be
yeah.
able to choose and then initialize that main folder. And then if you move everything in there, or if you
Okay.
already have everything in there, then you should be good to go. Again, if you get an error, then you would just have to then navigate to whichever folder is giving you the error, remove that, and then you should be, and then try to reinitialize for your main parent folder.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Somebody said, do you have a harder time finding files projects though, if you don't know the folder they're in? So obviously that's like a naming convention thing. Great question, Stacy. If you guys are putting in the GitHub assignment or GitHub link, you can still go on GitHub and then, just literally take the link, navigate to the folder of whatever project, do that. And then I can clone from there. That would be the only hard thing is I've got to clone the entire repository. Or if you wanted me to check your code or like, hey, can you check this assignment? I'd have to go in and clone that entire thing. So, if we're in week 6 and you're wanting to do that, I have to download everything, which is fine. It doesn't really do anything for me because I can just delete after. But naming conventions are fine. And also I can just go in and look at your code and we can have a meeting and go through line by line and say like, help me understand what's going on here. And, I've done this a while, so I could just look at the code and be like, yeah, that should work. And if it's not working, then we can dive into that. So great question. Any
I
other
have a
question?
question.
Yeah, go ahead.
So if you do make each push like an individual folder with its own node modules and its own init or whatever,
Mhm.
does that matter with space on your own personal computer? Would that take up more space? Is that because you said there's a ton of node modules, is that
Mhm.
going to be like
So-
if you did it all the time?
Yeah, so you actually have node modules regardless, right? So see, even in my client, I have this node modules. Just a reminder, if you like your computer should be fine. It is a lot, and it's a lot for like a zipped file, or if you're uploading to GitHub, it might take a really long time. If you don't have a git ignore. Just as a reminder, you could CD into client. So whichever folder has your node modules. So if I ls, I see it here. And then if I am having, if you have space or you're having space issues, you could always just do rm rf node modules. I've run this. Cool. Now if I see this, oh, it's not there anymore. Cool. I've saved the space. And if you ever want to go rework on that assignment, because of this nifty little file right here, you can see in my project, I don't have node modules anymore, but because of this beautiful little file, this package.json, this is saying, cool, this is what I need in order to run, right? Here are all my dependencies. So what I can do, and this is what I do with your assignments, is I can just navigate to the folder that's got my package.json, and I just say npm install. So this is for you. If you need to save space, you can delete your node modules. If you ever want to go work on it, you can just do npm install. And what this npm install is going to do is it's going to come to this package.json, read these dependencies and see what do I need in order for me to run. And then now if you look, I've got my node modules back. So if you need to free up space, you can feel free to delete your node modules. If you are putting to GitHub, this git ignore is automatically going to ignore it. So you don't even have to worry about it. This would be just, again, depending on if your machine itself is running out of space, then you could go through and do that. So perfect. Any other questions? Great questions, guys. Okay. So I thought it would be good to just sort of walk through again the file structure just to make sure. I know this is super, unfamiliar, and we talked about it on Thursday. Really want to make sure you guys have an understanding of kind of what we need to touch and what we don't. Just as a reminder here, we're not going to touch anything in our public except for I will eventually, and on our office hour tomorrow, I'm going to do this. We are going to put our Bootstrap link here. I actually have it as a, oh, nope, that's not what I wanted. I've got it as a hotkey for me. I just created this. So this is my Bootstrap link. This is the only time if we are going to do this. If I wanted to put a link, you can also download Bootstrap as part of your package. But if you wanted to do a link, I like the link more. then you can do that in your index.html file. Other than that, you're not going to touch this file. If you really wanted to dive into maybe some of the theme color or, you know, any of the like favicon, if you guys are really working with that, that is like what is shown up here. These are your little favicons, right? This little MERN or React app where this little world is. If you really wanted to do that, you can kind of handle that and do this guy. But you want to make sure that, yeah, you can change. Yeah, you can change, Paul, like you can change what this is called too. So, like this content, this is what'll show up. Like if you were to, in theory, Google your, you know, if you were to host this, and this is like, what is that content in there? This is for making it dynamic. We don't have to worry about that. But yeah, here's your little icon, and you can change some of that stuff, but you don't really need to change anything here. The only thing, remembering the real important part, is this guy right here. This is the title, which would be what this is, React app. So if I were to say like Will's React app, it's not currently running. So anybody remember how I run a file? Run React?
npm start.
Yeah, npm start. So now if I do this and I don't do this, but I say localhost 3000, you get this, but now you see Will's React app right here. That's just coming from that title change right here. So if you wanted to change that, you can. If you wanted to add a link, you can, but you don't really need to touch really anything else. For this class, you can always dive in, and I encourage you to tinker with code and make sure that it is, you know, kind of understanding breaking stuff. It's a great way to learn stuff. But for right now, you don't really have to do anything with that. So that's our public folder. Now, really the meat and potatoes here is this index.js, which we're going to touch really in week like 5. So we don't need to touch it for right now, but just remembering that this is, at the end of the day, this is what is rendering our application, our main component of app, at the element that's got the ID of root, to where that is this guy right here, right? That's really sort of under the hood how this is all working. So we don't need to touch the index.html, and we don't need to touch index.js until we deal with routing, which again is like week 5. So we can get rid of that. The main thing we're going to touch is we're going to do app.js. We're going to handle this. And then we're also going to handle creating our own components. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to say components. And then I'm going to have just, I'm going to call it, anybody have a name? What should I do? So I'm going to say first. As a reminder, you always want to make sure that this is capital. Anybody remember the hotkey for this to automatically do this for me? Yes. REFCE, cool, brings it in, gives me my arrow function. We are now good to go. Here's my component. And we're going to just call this first component. Cool. And if I wanted to show this, how would I do that? Yeah, great job, Nandor. Well, how would I show that first component? What are some things I need to do? Feel free to come off mute. I want this to render.
You want to create a HTML tag under within div, maybe H1.
Yeah, so I need to bring that in, right? So the way I can actually do that is just by calling the component's name, right? So I want to call the component's name. Now, if I automatically do this and I click this guy, 2 important things happen, right? I need to first close off my component, so that way it's working. Great. And then secondly is I'm importing. I have to import my component in order for me to use it. If I don't import it, I don't have the ability to use it. And I'm going to get an error that says, hey, I don't know what first component is, right? And if we were to look at this, we have this. Somebody asked, don't we need to import React? So that is older. You don't necessarily need to anymore, but in our components, it automatically for the REFCE will do that. But now it doesn't have to do it anymore. But great catch. We're
Well, that
gonna
boiler-
import something else from React today, our new hook. But yeah, we can do it this way. So great job, guys. This is exactly how we are rendering our first component. So we're able to see that, hey, we can do something and maybe have an H2 that says, whoa, we did it. And then now if I look and it says, whoa, we did it. So we can render this component and show it on our app.js. And we talked on Friday that we can have a component within a component, and then we can kind of get in that entire loop right there for sure. Cool. Does anybody remember if I wanted to pass in a name for first component and I wanted it to, and I wanted my first component to be able to have access to a name? What would I do there? Anybody remember? Yeah. How would we use props? Okay.
You want to
Somebody
define a
walk me through it.
variable.
As
You want to use in that, yeah, app.js.
In my app.js.
I would, yeah, you'd simply put it like first name equals, then whatever variable.
Yeah,
You
we'll
can
call
create a
it
new
Will.
one, or you can link to a object if you have a list of items, or
Yeah. Yeah.
and then you can
Go ahead, Cameron.
and then you just call it to that in your component. You
Perfect.
just use first name.
Yeah, that's perfect. That's exactly what we could do. And we're going to see,
Oh.
we saw on Friday that if I had some sort of value here, I've just had some sort of object, I could call that value. We're going to see a different way of something. But before we do that, now I've passed in, these are my props, right? Oops, I don't think this will break it, but I passed in my props. So what do I need to do after I pass this in here? In my first component, we do need the curly boys, Tristan. Absolutely. How are we going to do that? I showed you guys 3 different ways we could do it last week. So I'm passing it into, think about a function, right? I'm passing this information into, yeah, exactly. I have to pass my props into my first component. So there's 3 ways we can do it. I could just say props. And then if I say props, then I can say something like const name equals props, but we have multiple things, right? We don't just want one name. I could say first name and last name. And remember, these have to match what's being passed through. And this is me destructuring my props, right? So I'm taking in this props object, which we saw last week, and then I am destructuring it to where I'm creating this variable of first name that's going to be equal to whatever is passed in for first name. Lastly, I'm creating my last name variable, and that is last name. So now anywhere within first component that I call first name and last name, we can see that work, right?
So they have to match exactly, right? It's not based on position or anything.
Yeah, remembering that when props is being passed through, it's just an object. And so this is saying, hey, go find the key of first name and get that value.
Right.
I think I saw, might have been Stacy. Yeah, I think you can do this guy to where we could say like, first name. If we wanted it to be called something different, we can say, hey, pass in first name. I'm going to get that value, but I want to refer to it as this guy. And obviously first name doesn't make any sense, but you could do that as well if you didn't want to. They do have to refer to the exact key, because this creates our object. It has to refer to the exact key that is in our object, but then we can change it by just doing this guy right here, by doing the colon and then our first name. And that's just from our destructuring. The other way is I could not destructure, and I could say props dot first name, props dot last name in here, right? So I could have like a p tag that says props dot first name. This is my least favorite way, so I'd encourage you guys to not do this, just because you're adding in a lot of the same sort of things. You're saying props a lot, and it just wouldn't be clean code, in my opinion. The last way to do it, does anybody remember the last way we could do this? It's my favorite way, the most efficient in my opinion. Yeah. Exactly, Michael. I could actually just destructure up here. So I can actually just take this guy. And instead of going props in here, I can just do this. And this will destructure my props as they come in and then create my first name and my last name. So we can do it this way. This is my preferred way. Any way does in theory work. So totally up to you. But this is us destructuring our props and handling them there. Right. And so now anywhere I call first name or my last name, I just have access to it just like this. So those are the three ways that we destructure props. Are there any questions on that?
Is
would
the
you-
app call the same?
What do you mean? I'm sorry.
The call from app.js, is it the same no matter which way of those three you do
Yep.
it?
Absolutely, Benjamin. Regardless, we're just creating this key of first name that's got a value of Will and this key of last name that's got a value of Calhoun. However we do it on this end doesn't matter, right? It's like, hey, I've given you the material, what you want to do with it, right, is up to you. If I give you a meal kit and you want to cook the meat first, and then you want to do this, and then you want to do your potatoes, or you want to do your potatoes first, like it doesn't, I gave you the meal kit, my job is done, right? You've paid me, we're good to go. Same sort of thing. I've given you the material you need. However you want to handle it, that is up to you.
I have a question. Would you
Yeah.
mind putting them side by side, your app.js and your first component.js X, like split screen?
Absolutely.
Because I've seen different ways to do like the first components. Oh, okay.
Yep. So I'm
'Cause
calling
there's
my,
like,
go ahead.
sorry, because there's like a way you can do it with the, oh, okay, I see. Never mind. I was doing it like first name was a line, last name. And so yours first component is all on one line. Okay.
Yeah. So we're going to get into state, and that's where we're going to be able to start holding some data. And maybe that's where you've seen it. I'm going to teach you one way of state, and I'm going to teach you a second way of state. Again, it's totally up to you. Tomorrow is where we'll kind of get into why I'm going to teach you the second way that is usually students' favorite. That's not on the platform, but is how you will actually do it in real life. Usually, both will work. Just want to clarify with that, but like real world experience, because it's more efficient and because that's what the actual developers will do. So I'm going to teach you it that way as well. But yeah, for right now, this is just handling props. We're not even dealing with state. So
I
somebody
have a
says, do you have an
question.
extension installed that autocompletes HTML tags? Great question, Krista. I actually don't call this a JS. So if I call it a .jsx, that's where that autocomplete comes from an HTML perspective. If I call this a JS, this will work just fine. But if I say JSX, that's where that autocomplete will come in. So anything that you have like with an HTML, that'll work. So just name it JSX, and then that'll fix that for you. Cool. Any other questions before we get into state?
Yeah, I have a question.
Yeah.
When we did the instruction, like first name and last name, and then it's like a props is a method, right?
It's a what? I'm sorry.
Props is a method, right?
Yeah. Yeah. We're taking in props. Well, it's, you can think about it as in like more of an argument. And then it's just an object, right? That we're passing into our function. Remember, just these components are really just functions. And so it's just an argument in the same way that if I want to say, if I create a function that takes in two numbers and returns the sum of them, I have to give them the two numbers, right? And the function handles that in the same, handles that. And then maybe, has some sort of value that says return, A plus B. This is just a function, and this is the argument being passed in with props. We are destructuring the argument, but at the end of the day, we're just passing in an object of a key value pair. In this case, the key is first name, the value is last name. The second key is first name, the value is Will. The second key is last name. The second value is Calhoun.
Okay. Then we don't need to say props. It's like, since we like, is it props is because it knows because we just import the React or something?
Nope. So props, it's just a way that React handles it. I can say props. And then what I can do then is, like I said, I could say const you know, first name, last name equals props.
Mhm.
I could say it just like this, but it's just referring to this object called props. Right? If I were to, we saw this on Thursday, if I just console logged props, it's just an object. And so we're just destructuring an object. So we can do it this way just fine. And then again, we can also do it to where if I've just got like a P tag, I could say something like props dot, right? If I didn't have this guy, if I didn't destructure it, I could do something like this because it's just an object that's being passed through as an argument. And so I'm saying, go into my props object, get the key of first name, and give me the value and put that right here. Go into my
Okay.
props object, look for the key of last name, get the value, put it right here. So it says my name is Will Calhoun,
All right.
which is what we
Thank you.
see. Yeah, exactly. Thanks, Paul. Whatever's being passed through is just an argument. And that is what these components functions are expecting is a parameter, right? It's just props of any kind. And so we can destructure it in a million different ways. Or you don't even have to destructure and you can do it this way. So those are kind of the three ways. Again, I like to do it to where this just says first name, because I think it's cleaner and just less code, right?
I actually hadn't seen it done like that. It is way cleaner.
Yeah. Yeah. So you just do it like this. And then it works the exact same. So if I come here, I still get Will Calhoun, right? It's just destructuring whilst it takes it in. Okay. If there's more questions, I can help after class. I do want to move forward because we have something that is important that we will learn that is going to be an important tool. And this is really hooks. This is the beginning of us learning about hooks. We're going to talk about synthetic events tomorrow when we're dealing with events like our on change and our on submit. But hooks are really, really, really important when it comes to React. All hooks are. Do not get like it sounds crazy. It's just a type of function, right? It's just these methods associated that React has access to. And so there's a whole bunch of hooks. So like if we were to open this in a new tab, there's a whole bunch of different hooks. I think there's 6 kind of main ones. We're only going to really worry about 2. And then when it comes to like week 7 and 8, I will help you refactor your code to maybe think through a couple different things when we're dealing with re-rendering and stuff like that, using like use reference, use ref, like when we're handling that. But for right now, you don't need to worry about it. What hooks are going to do is they're going to allow us to do different things, like keeping track of some value, which is what we're going to do for like state, right? Or when we deal with use effect, it's like if I want our code to run something or my component, it's really just the functionality within my component, right? If I want my component to remember something, I can use a hook to do that. If I want my component to do something when something changes, so let's say, you know, anytime I have a bank app and I submit something, I want it to show my new deposit, I can do that, right? I can use hooks, and it, at the end of the day, is really just us being able to use functions that our component has the ability to call, right? The 2 ones we're going to use are use state and use effect. We're going to learn about use effect a little bit later on, but use state is going to be a really popular and really important thing for you to understand. At the end of the day, you can think of use state as just a way that our component can keep track of some information. That's it. If you did Python or Java, then you can sort of think about it like session. If you didn't do that, then who cares about session, right? Don't even worry, forget what I just said. All you're really doing is focusing on what is the functionality of my component. What can my component do? What can, in this case, can my component remember? Right? If I want to keep track of some information, if something's going to be updating or changing within my component and I want to keep track of that, I can do that, right? And the one we're going to really use for hooks, or what the first hook that we're really going to use is one called use state. And so it is going to be a way that we can keep track of information as things change, as a form is being filled out. I want to keep track of all that information. So when I submit it, I can take that information and go submit it to my backend, right? That's really going to be the power of what we are using use state for. And there's some walkthroughs here that we'll look at in a second, but from the beginning, I'm going to get rid of this and get rid of this. Use state, the first thing we need to do is we need to import it, right? And the way we import it is just from React, we're going to say use state. Cool. We are using state, right? And we're importing it from React. Now, let's say that I have a user that, let's say that we're building Facebook, right? Because Facebook created React, so that's why I always use Facebook. We want to keep track of when a component renders. We want to have our user and we want to have that information, right? Well, what I can do is I can create state for this component and then keep track of that information. And it might not make sense here because we're dealing with props. So you might be like, why wouldn't you just pass this through? But just kind of stay with me here for a second. And then tomorrow, as we're dealing with form, we'll really see the power of why we want to keep this persistent data. So if I want to do some use state, I can say something like const. Now here, I'm going to do this bracket, right? And this bracket is going to give me two things and it's expecting two arguments. First, I'm going to say first name. And then it's going to have set first name. So whatever we do, whatever we name it, right? I'm going to say, perfect. So let's break down, what did I just do here? Here, I've created this const, right? And this is a list of two things, or an array, sorry. It's called a list in Python, of two things. This is my first name, or often known as my getter. And then the second thing is my last name, which is called my setter, right? Or sorry, my set first name, which is my setter. What I'm doing is I am saying I want to keep track of this, this information. And when I refer to it, I want to refer to it as first name. And then if I want to reset it, if I want to change my first name, then I can use this setter to set my first name. Then what we're saying is it is equaling, and we're saying we want to use this use state method. And then here's what we're passing in as the beginning. So if I were to even say something like this, we're going to pass it in as an empty string, right? So currently, if we just forget about this for a second. Oh, I did it again. We should forget about this for a second. If I am dealing with this, I don't have any props. Let's pretend we don't have any props. And I want to keep track of a first name. I can say, cool, I want to start it as nothing. But as a first name is given, let's say I had some input file, right? That it is given, I want to change this information, right? And I want to set my first name to whatever name is given. And then I can show it here. So say we had an input that is, so let's just create a little, I don't want to go over forms yet. Cool. Maybe we'll just come right here. Here, we are taking this value, right? Where we've got this counter that takes in props, if there was props to be passed in. And all it's doing is we have some state, usually call it like count and then set count. And we're setting it, starting at 0. So this use state is us defining it at the beginning. We're starting it at 0. Now what we can do is if I'm showing this in the same way, if I were to say John, We're saying, cool, I've got this information called first name. I want to set it to start at John. Cool. Now I'm showing it here. So I should be able to see this. And it says, my name is John. I am storing the information up here. We will get to us setting probably tomorrow, because we're going to have some function that sets our first name. But I can reset it and change this first name value, and then it will show whatever value we keep track of here. Exactly. Thanks, Paul. This is our sort of default. What are we starting with? And then that value is going to go here. And then the minute we change, then it is good to go. And it just keeps holding on to that data until our folder is like, until our entire assignment is rerun. So right now it says, my name is John. Cool. We've got our getter. Getter is just, I want to go and get the information at this. You can sort of think about this as a variable, right? I want to go get the information that is being stored at first name. And then when we have a function, or when we are wanting to set our first name, we're going to use our setter, right? Our setter is just a function that will change the value of our getter. Okay. Any initial questions there? I might just do this. And that way we can see it working, because I haven't talked about it, events yet. So let's say counter JSX. Híjole. Cool. Okay. Let me call my counter here. Perfect. Okay. So what this is doing is we have got, I don't know what this is going on here. Perfect. We are bringing in state here. We've got this new component called counter, and all it's doing is it's showing, it's got a div and it's just showing our current count, right? So if I come here, it says 0, right? And then click me. We have a button that says click me. Now we'll handle events tomorrow, but all this is doing is this is an event, right? This is an on click, and you guys all should have learned about on click events in web fundamentals. Really, it's just an event that's happening that JavaScript is listening to. It's an event listener, right? And so when we click on it, we're saying, hey, when I click on this, I want you to do something. In this case, what we're saying is when this is clicked, I want you to run this function called handle click. And all this function does, I think it'll probably be a little bit easier if you see it this way. All this does is it says, okay, when this button is clicked, I want you to go into my state, which my state is just this object here. I want you to go in and I want you to do click count. So this key +1. And so when we click this button, it's going to go and it's going to set my state. It's going to say, cool, this click count. So this object right here, this key right here, because this is an object, this key, I want to make it equal to what is currently there. So right now it starts at 0, and I want to add 1 to it. And so what it'll do is it'll make click count equal to 1. Then if I click it again, because we're holding on, we're setting this value to 1. If I click it again, it's going to go, or this value technically, I'm going to go in and I'm going to find this and it's going to say, okay, this is one. Or say, cool, now add another one. And I'm resetting the value at this guy right here. So if I run this, I say it goes 1, 2, 3, and now I'm able to keep track of that information. Now, if I refresh this, it goes away, right? Because this is not temporary data, but it's not going to stay forever. We're not dealing with a database to where it's always going to keep that information. It's just going to be while this is what we call mounted, while our component's mounted and while we have access to it. And then once we refresh, we sort of wipe our slate clean here. But it'll keep track of this information as long as I need it to. Like if somebody's filling out a form, then it'll keep track of what are they filling out? What are the input changes? And then from there, we can send that information to our database. Okay. We talked a lot right there. Hit me with some questions. How are we feeling about this? Kind of just went from 0 to 100 real fast. I feel like you guys were crushing the first parts, components and props, and then we introduce state. What are we thinking? What are we feeling? How are we doing? Put a 1 in the chat if this is making full sense. Put a 0 if you have no idea. Cool. So lots of 1s. It's okay if you're not. So yes, state is cleared by refreshing, because what happens is, to kind of nerd out a little bit, when we're dealing with functional components, there's this thing called mounting. And so really we have our DOM, right? Our document object model. And that is really what is showing up and what is on our HTML. What do we have access to? And what React does is it creates this thing called a virtual DOM, right? To where I have access and it will compare the two, and it's always listening and saying, are these the same? And if not, then I need to update this. Well, when I'm calling something, when I call for a component to be ran, so in this case, app.js is calling counter, what it does is it goes and it renders this component and it does what we call mounting it, right? It mounts our component, meaning cool, it's now in the docket, it's now available. And when it mounts it, it creates this state. It does all of this, right? It kind of makes sure everything is happening. Now, when I refresh that, I'm going and I'm saying, okay, cool, I need to refresh this. It goes here. It again calls my counter. So it unmounts it when I refresh, and then it remounts it. So every time it does that, it's going to set it equal to 0. And so different than session is this will, every time this component is remounted, meaning it enters the DOM again, it will refresh it, because it'll set it similar to, like, if we have a for loop and you have a variable inside of a for loop, how it always resets it, same sort of thing will happen. Anytime you remount your DOM, your component, it'll sort of refresh your state. That's where we're going to get into how we that's where the back end is going to come in, and we're going to have some information that we can keep track of. But from a state perspective, yeah, anytime this is refreshed, anytime this is refreshed, it's just going to reset this value, kind of like resetting a variable. Yeah, so there's a different way that we can do it. We're not always going to use this. In fact, we will rarely sort of use it this way. No, we will use it like this, because what we're going to do is we're going to, so one thing I'll just sort of bring up at the beginning is you'll see this in the platform that'll say something like this: const last name, last name. Let's say we had const, let's say we have a form, and this is what the last thing I'll show you. And then we'll kind of go through this: set age, hair color, and let's say const, I don't know, eye color. Perfect.
Will, is it the autopilot that auto completes your stuff,
Yeah,
or is
GitHub
that the
Copilot.
JSX?
Yeah,
The
that's
Copilot,
GitHub
okay.
Copilot.
Yeah,
That's
all right.
kind of creating the stuff. Yeah, that's just Copilot.
Yeah, I just see it like it's like grayed in, and then you can kind of just say yes.
Yeah,
Go for it.
yeah, it's giving
cool.
a suggestion. And if I press tab, then it'll take it.
Is it
to
just like guessing based on the previous entries what an appropriate? That's so cool.
Yeah, it's wild, right? Yeah, and then it'll, as we build out more, it'll see like how I like to do things, and so it'll suggest it. It's pretty sweet.
And then so for state, so every time that the setter function is called, it updates the value of the getter and then re-renders the component.
Absolutely, yeah. So this is one way we could do it, right? We could do it this way and have our state split up individually with each piece of state. This is fine. I believe this is how the platform shows you how to do it. Like, especially when we get to forms. So using state, setting state, putting it together. Yeah. So when we get to forms, it's going to have you do it this way. That's fine. You can do that. This will work just fine. Now there's a second way that we can do it that I think is much more efficient. And it's where, let's say we're trying to just deal with a person, right? Well, and we'll see kind of why tomorrow is really where we'll see why I think that it is much more efficient this way. But I can say const, let's say user, comma, set user. And this is going to be equal to use state, which is an object. But instead of doing them all in their each individual piece of state, I can just do this. Oops. And I can set my state to just this user object. Now, again, tomorrow we'll see the power behind this and why I do it this way and why most people do it this way. Because then it allows us to, anytime we have a change within our form, instead of having to redo and run all of these same, these are kind of, they're not doing the same thing because they're all handling different pieces of information. But anytime I have a form, if I look at a form, you see, I'm going to have to do this. I'm going to take my event, which again, we're going to learn all about tomorrow. I'm going to have to run my setter, right? Well, instead I can just have one function that goes and we'll look at, well, hey, which key are we trying to set? Let's just set that. And so it will clean up our code and really like truncate and condense how many lines of code we're going to do. Both of these will work just fine. And we'll go through both options tomorrow. This one is my preferred way because also I think it's a little bit cleaner and easier to understand. If I've got a whole bunch of stuff on a user, that can get kind of confusing compared to this guy. It's like, oh yeah, I know that this is all just one user. But again, if you are working ahead on forms, both of them will operate just fine. We'll just have to handle this a little bit different when we do our on change. But that is state. We are just from a very high level keeping track of data within the component. If we want our data, we go to our getter, i.e. call our getter. If we want to change that value, then I call my setter, my set state function. And then we are good to go, right? I do set state and then I add that information. I think I could, this is kind of confusing. I'm going to try something. I think this would work just fine. I think it's kind of dumb looking. So let's see if we can do this. And then I can just run. Let's see if this works. Nope. You still running? Nope. Oh. Oh. It's not liking state is not defined. Oh, right here. So we should just be able to just count. And then it did not like first name. Because I got rid of this. Do this. Okay. Yeah, so that works the same way. I don't know why they made it so confusing. So I think this will be easier for you guys to understand. I've got my getter of count, right? This is just keeping track of my count. This is my setter. We're going to start at 0. When this is clicked, I want to run this function, and all this function does is it sets my count. So it resets this value to whatever it was plus 1. And so now as I do this, I can just go here, and then it's going to take 1. Now count as 1. So whenever I click it again, it goes count as 1. It goes, runs this. It says set count. So I'm resetting this value to 1 plus 1, which we now see is 2. So that's all this is doing. Our setter is just a method, and you can see how it is just a method here, right? It's just a function call. And we passed in the information we want to set it to. In this case is count plus 1, and therefore we get 2, or whatever count previously was plus 1 more.
Since handle click is only 1 line, could you also just do it as an inline arrow function for the on click?
Yep, you can do it just like this.
And then could you just pass, like, could you like inside of the on click, instead of declaring it as a constant, could you just do like an arrow function, like inside of the brackets on the on click?
Yeah, so you would want to, you do need to have it as a arrow function though. So I think in the platform it shows that, and we'll talk about that tomorrow. The reason is because with React, the way that it operates, if you don't, let's say you just had this, like, let's say this wasn't an arrow function, you just had like some random function called handle click. What will end up happening is, because it's not an anonymous or an arrow function, it'll automatically click that within React. And so even if you haven't clicked it, that number is going to go up, and that's going to become an issue. So you always want to make sure that we have an arrow function here to help. And that's what prevents that. So if you did want to, just like you said, instead of having like this entirely full, handle submit, that we could really just take that information and put it in here, and then it'd do the same thing. Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. I could think if we just did this. I believe I got to pass in the event though.
I don't think you have to, since you're using state.
I got mine to work without passing in the event.
If you're manipulating that event, we'd have to.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. So it works just fine. So we could have done that exact same thing too. Yep. So it's even reducing our code even further. Cool. Any other questions?
Yeah, I did have a really quick question. For count, we can literally put it at any number, right? When we click the button, if we want to count to be 10 or 20 or whatever. Count
Yeah,
can
you
be
would just
whatever
start
number.
it.
It's not like plus or anything.
You would just start it here. You started at 20, and then if you wanted it to go up, see, it starts at 20, and then you just start from there.
Okay, so I know that like if we put it on like the count where it's storing it, it'll allow us to store it at whatever number. So storing it at 20, but I'm asking for the set count, the plus in the line 9. Can we set that to a different number and have it count at a different rate?
Oh, like instead of 1, could I do 20 here?
Yeah, and would it count 20, 40, 60, 80?
Yeah, it should. Let's check. Yeah, would do that.
Awesome, thank you.
Yeah, of course. And yeah, somebody because this isn't props, we could just do this. We don't actually have any props. They're being passed through. We should do that.
Also, another question.
Mhm.
How you got rid of the const set count, or like the handle click function?
Mhm.
Would it be better to keep it as a variable, do for readability, instead of making an in line 9?
Yeah, great
the
question,
element.
Zachary. So tomorrow, when we are looking at our code, if you're going to do if you're going to keep it to where we've got, let me pull up my code. If you're going to do it like this, where you have each individual piece, it is going to be much, much more efficient to do it just inline, because each time you are doing this, right? These have to be different because you're doing different setters. So then you'd either have to map it, or it'd kind of be interesting, right? Because you're calling a different setter per piece of state. If we do it this way though, you're exactly correct. And this is why I like to do it. We'll just create what we call a change handler that just goes, and that we can make it look very similar to this, where I've just got, or how it originally was, where I just had a change handler. And then, sorry, something just went in my eye. To where then we can reuse the same event handler for whatever part of our code. And that to me is a little bit more efficient because like you said, the reusability. But if you are dealing with individual components, it's a lot harder to use reusability because you're using multiple setters. Like in this case, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 different setters. If we keep it like this, we just have one setter. We just will have to do a few things in order for us to get this to target this, whichever specific key that we're trying to target. But I like it usually with students, once I teach it the other way too, they're like, oh yeah, I'm going to use that moving forward.
Gotcha.
Cool. Any other questions, friends?
I have a question. Can we use like a parameter as a key? Key as a parameter and just say like use first name key, set key, and then use for every setting in the form, whatever form gives us as a key, like input, the key name, and we can use it in our constant. Can we do that?
I'm not quite following the question. Are you saying that if I want to target just first name in my input, I would have a name, a first name, then we can target that way?
If you open the form, there was, here there is on change event, and in every like set email, set password, instead of doing this, can we use set key and then
set and then the
use
key right here.
just one function for every input?
So we will be able to use one function if we set up our state this way. If we don't set up our state, then it would honestly be more work to do because you would have to it wouldn't make sense in order to do it. If you wanted to have one change handler, then you set up your state this way. And we'll do that tomorrow.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, that's exactly what we're going to do is we're just going to target the key name. So in our input, we'll have a name and we'll say, hey, cool, go match the input key or the input name with the key name. And then whatever e.target.value is. So the value coming from that input, we're going to set that value. That's exactly what we're going to do with this guy right here.
Okay. Thank you.
You're already thinking ahead. I love it. Any other questions? Okay. Well, I'll go ahead and stop the recording. I'll hang out here for a second if anybody needs anything. And if not, I hope you guys have a wonderful night.
Have a good night.